Hi, my name is Alain Cardon. I'd like to share a few thoughts about the definition of coaching tonight. My practice is international coach for individual and team coaching, mostly in Europe these days. So to come to the definition of coaching, I'd like to first say, well, it's a profession and it's a number of skills, and that's quite a difference. In other words, if you practice coaching as a professional, you're actually earning more than 50% of your income, I would say, with this profession. You could be probably a part-time coach a third of the time and so on. But it's important to know exactly what you're doing professionally. So coaching is a profession. To give a metaphor, we could say it's like driving. In other words, I may drive my car to and from work and on vacation. That's a set of skills that I use for different reasons in different places. And coaching is a set of skills that people could use in a lot of different contexts, as managers, as salespeople, as even in your personal life you could use coaching skills. They are communication tools. Using coaching tools in everyday life is not being a coach, it's being a human being, it's being a manager. We're being paid for other reasons. So I may be a good driver, an excellent driver, but not a professional driver. The day I start earning a living from my driving by being a taxi driver or being a delivery driver, then I am becoming a professional driver. In this case, I may even want to join a professional association to protect my profession, which is, for instance, in coaching, I could join the International Coach Federation or other federations of the same type, and I would be recognized as a driver. I may have skills that correspond to different testing methods as a taxi driver and or as a delivery person, and I start going into another category. I'm not just a practitioner of the coaching tools. I'm using these tools and skills to make a living, and I may market those skills and get paid for it and get recognition for it, help clients achieve their goals or their destinations. So the first thing when defining coaching is to say, well, coaching is a profession. Now, what exactly that profession does needs to be defined too. One of the words often used with respect to coaching, it's a profession where you accompany clients. Now, accompanying needs to be defined too, because accompanying is a word that has been used in a lot of similar professions. Etymologically, the word means companion. Accompanying is being a companion to somebody. In other words, we could say walking side by side. We are each other's companions. So if I accompany somebody, I decide to walk alongside that person for a certain distance, and I may, so long as I don't push the person or precede the person or pull the person or carry the person, it is closer to the definition of accompanying in the sense of a companion. The word companion actually is often used to define couples, and I think excuse me, that when you are coaching somebody, in a way it is the same type of temporary partnership where most of the time the coach learns as much from the client as the client may learn from the coach. They both proceed along their shared path for a certain distance. So coaching is a really particular type of peer relationship, and if this is considered, the word accompanying is very appropriate. Now the next word to consider is, do coaches accompany clients? And here I'd like to be a little more precise about this, because actually coaching is a linguistic approach. It is based on dialogue and conversation. And I would rather use the word dialogue. So coaching is a profession where the coach accompanies client dialogue. In other words, the coach is focused on what the client says, how the client says it, and who the client is through their expression, and it is mostly a linguistic expression. Coach training throughout the world is focused on this linguistic dimension. It is not focused on body so much. Coaching is not a massage type of approach. It is not a I don't know, astrological kind of approach. It does not really blend with other prior professions that accompanied clients in different ways. So accompanying client dialogue, it is useful to focus on what the word dialogue means. Interestingly, most people think dialogue mean two conversing people. A dialogue is like two and logos, which is actually a mistake. Dialogue does not mean two people conversing. Dia actually comes from Greek and means through, like via in Roman. In other words, dialogue alludes to the fact that through the word, when people speak, they structure their meaning. So if you have somebody think and try to work through an issue or a problem and put it into words through the words or through the linguistics they use in their thinking process, and they're giving structure to their issue, to their goal, to their thinking, to their feeling, etc. So coaching is a space that is created to permit clients to work through their stuff through the language. Dialogue is through language. A collective dialogue, we could say dialogue in a team, for instance, or between partners, is a dialogue. It's an exchange. It's a verbal exchange through which people create common knowledge or common meaning, actually. That's the idea that Plato had originally, which is if we let people speak and converse collectively, or if we let one person speak and converse, gradually they would find the truth by simply talking and thinking and putting into words, or giving a structure to their thinking through words. So dialogue is actually a sort of emerging process that permits the surfacing of meaning by the search for right words. In this sense, coaching is really accompanying client dialogue, because it is creating a space in which the client will choose the right words, search for the right words, sometimes even invent their words to give a structure to the meaning they're trying to grasp, the meaning in their lives, their professional lives, or their personal lives. In a sense, it's interesting to underline the difference between the notion of dialogue and the notion of discussion. The word discussion is very, very different. It means to separate or to break, and to break, actually. This is separation, and cushion, like percussion, is to break into small pieces. In a discussion, when you have two people discussing something, most of the time you will see that the main concern in the process is to see who wins by breaking or picking apart the other person's words or argument. There is quite a lot of similarity between the discussion. So far we've seen that coaching is it's a profession by which a coach accompanies a client dialogue. Now this, so far, would be putting coaching in practically the same type of context as an analytical situation where we would have a therapist listen to the client speak in a very non-directive way, while the client just goes on, typically on the couch, just developing and thinking and probably structuring their lives while the therapist just patiently listens in a very wide open space. Now coaching is a little bit different from this because it's not just accompanying client dialogue. It is accompanying client dialogue while the client focuses on desired outcomes. In other words, in the beginning of a coaching context, situation, it could be a session or even a sequence, it is important to, for the coach to, with the client actually, to co-define the client desired objective. In other words, what does the client want to achieve in a particular situation, in a particular dialogue? What is the client aiming for? What does the client want to get out of a session? What is their desired end result? So the coach will listen to the client patiently, but always keep in mind, is the client moving forward on this line, on this quest that has been predefined jointly with the coach at the beginning of the session? It doesn't mean that this necessarily needs to stay rigid or fixed. The client may decide at some point, oh, I want to change direction. In which case the coach will just validate that the direction has changed and okay, let's go in this new direction. But the coaching process is always centered on a desired outcome or a direction that may change, but it is not just a meandering process where the client just talks about everything that comes through their mind. So we could say that coaching is goal-focused. Now, I haven't used the word goal so far very intently because it is more useful to define coaching as an outcome or end result oriented process rather than a goal oriented process. And that's a very different point of view. In other words, in a goal, if you're looking at a goal, almost by definition it is something that is off at a distance, and the person who is defining a goal is positioning themselves at a starting point. They're still at the beginning and the goal is far off. Coaching is much more outcome oriented and outcome focused. In other words, what is proposed to the client is to immediately define and position themselves at the finish line. And it's quite an important difference in my mind. In other words, if I really focus on the end result and really define it, the process to achieve this end result is going to be much more result-oriented. If I am just defining this end result as a goal, I'm putting this result at a far off distance, and very quickly I will feel I need to get means, and I will be probably much more means-oriented in my process to reach the goal. Coaching is tries to make the goal much more accessible to the client by getting the client to very quickly define the end result, position themselves on the end result, and very often just almost look back to the present time from the achieved result and say what needs to be done. So it is not a work-oriented process to achieve a goal. It's much more a results-oriented process that will tend to aspire the client to the finish line as quick as possible. That is really an important difference in coaching, because coaching is very focused on achieving the result in a different way than if somebody puts the goal at a distance and then tries to make a heavy plan to achieve the goal. So to resume, it's about time to resume. Let us take our phrase from the beginning to the end. And so coaching is a profession for which the coach is paid, and it is a resource earning activity that is basically rests on accompanying clients in a peer relationship, but not really accompanying the client. It's accompanying client dialogue, while this client stays completely focused on achieving the desired outcome for which that client came to choose a coach. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you soon in another conference. Goodbye.